What's up? What's up? Welcome to Colored Commentary, colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. I am your host, Markus, Lloyd, and with me, as always, in the studio, Mr. Antwuan Malone. What's up, Antwuan?
What is up? What is up? What is up,
How
man?
you
We
doing?
are we're rocking the black shirts today.
You know, yeah, it's like
Team Black.
Team
today.
Black Day.
Yeah,
I feel like it's always
today. I feel black today.
Yeah,
just only today.
Just that's the it. What is it that constitutes feeling?
This black shirt is what I'm
just
saying.
the shirt.
It's just the black shirt. That's all. That's the.
That's as
extent
far
of
as
it.
you're gonna go.
The rest of it is what this whole thing has been about. You gotta go back to the first episode, and you can figure out all the rest. No,
Well, you know, we definitely talking about lots of things in here, and
Yeah.
it's for those of you who are jumping in and engaging. You know, if you coming in here in this episode, by now you know that we are talking about this idea of Christianity in the public square. What does that mean? Christianity in public square. So it's, you know, we live in a society that is not just a church society. We have to kind of move outside the church and be in spaces, whether it be in our schools, in our jobs, in our communities. And so how does the Christian engage that space effectively? Now, I think one of the highlights or the place that we take it maybe into level 2 is we're not only just engaging those spaces, but those spaces have laws and they have policies and they have different, people, elections and things to vote about and how the policy, the polity, if you will, are governed. And so it's really kind of dealing with, okay, so what does it look like for a Christian to be engaged in that space?
Yeah. It could be, and it's the reason we're doing this because I think it's a really interesting question, especially right now because we're seeing so much in our country where large blocks of people believe that they should have a major role in the social space, and some of it feels harmful and misrepresentative, and then there's other voices that in response to that are like, man, maybe we should go a completely different route. So I think this conversation is really, really interesting for this time right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously you got the extremes on that. I mean, obviously in our first episode, we kind of wrestled with a little bit the conversation of should Christians be engaged or not be engaged in the public square. And I don't know if we didn't necessarily say, yes, they should be, but
that's okay though. Right?
Well, but what I would say is we're continuing a series to talk about.
There you go. That's true. That's right.
Although we didn't say
land the plane.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Early.
No, but if we had said that you should not be involved in the public
then
square,
it's the end of that.
Then there's no series. It's just a 1-episode deal. So the rest of our time is dealing with people who are engaging as Christians in the public square and or just engaging in the public square and trying to figure out, okay, so what does that look like? How do we have a conversation about that?
I don't know. Maybe if you were to say no, then the question that follows is, well, maybe the question is yes, but how?
Yeah, that's fair.
And maybe that's part of what we're doing as well.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like what does it look like to be kingdom oriented and capital K kingdom?
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Right.
And pursue social influence. Yeah,
and
for the sake of the kingdom.
Right. And I think we talked about in episode 1 and being witnesses to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. Like you are having these places in which you're going, if you will, outside into different spaces. That verse doesn't necessarily say, hey, you're going to be engaged outside of the church. But there is a witness aspect that is trying to tell people about Jesus where Jesus maybe is not known. Yeah, right. So there is a public aspect that comes outside of just our work in the church. So, but we've got some fun today. Before we get to that, you know, we've started our segment here. We did
it. All right, the people are waiting.
Are they waiting for it?
They are.
All right.
I can tell.
For those of you
with
who
bated breath.
Yes, absolutely. So for those of you who've been watching and are excited about this, we have a little segment that we like to call "Say What."
Saith what?
That's right. And this is a section in which we utilize some of statements, sometimes questions that people ask that pertain to race or around race, if you will. Some of them are what maybe some people would think are outrageous. They could be like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe somebody said that." But some of them are stuff that actually happen pretty regularly, and so we want to engage that, talk through it and maybe try to understand a little bit about what's going on there, and maybe articulate our own experiences with that and how we can think about that.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so let's
jump in.
So we are going to bring in our special guest reader. We figure that we just need to have a different voice, not a voice that would necessarily voice these things, if you will, but a different voice. And so, if you've been around, we got Pepper in the house today. Pepper, how are you? Say hello.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, put a little pepper on it. Okay, so Pepper, we're in the say what moment
say what?
here. That's right. So, give us a say what that we can engage.
Okay, cool. This one says, "I'm a quarter." Fill in the blank. So I have the right to say this word or make this joke. The old 23andMe situation.
the get out of jail free card. Like,
I got Indian in my family. You know what I mean? That's so that's what we said in Texas. Everybody, all the black people had.
We all had Indian. Cherokee. That was the one. Everybody's like, I got Cherokee because Cherokee was the one that everybody wanted.
Exactly.
Somehow this is not good right now. This is the next say what. Right now, what we're doing.
This is what we're dealing. This is how people have engaged it. And again, it's all people kind of talking about that. Hey, I'm a quarter this. And I've heard it. I've heard it in all kinds. I remember I was at a church once, and I say now I think about it, I've had this happen in multiple churches. But there's the conversation that people are having around those who are indigenous to this country. Are they Indian? Are they Native American? Are they First Americans?
Right.
And so I had a cat one time. He was saying, I've got this Indian that I know, and I was like, what, like Indian? What kind of Indian? And he did the whole dot feather thing, and then even did kind of like the war cry, if you will. He said that kind of Indian. I say, bro, you can't do it. He goes, no, it's okay. I'm a quarter Indian, right? I can do it. And I was like.
Like, no, bro.
No,
still,
I don't think so. That's my opinion.
Is
like
that the question? I guess that's the question.
That's the question. Like, so I don't know. You got any thoughts?
I think it's weird that there's a permission structure.
Okay.
To these sort of things, and I know this is because the immediate thing that comes to my brain is like the N word. And who gets to use it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so that's the immediate application. Somebody's like, well, I can't believe you said the N word. You're like, yeah, but my mama's black or whatever. And so, like,
I mean, if their mom's black,
but they may not look like in this context. Like they may be passing as something not black.
Oh, okay.
But then all of a sudden, somehow they get some cred, and I guess what we're supposed to say is, never mind.
Okay.
I guess that's good. So I don't know. I think it's weird to have this kind of permission structure around this. It's a weird concept. I guess what people are saying is that I cannot be using this. They're assuming that by saying this phrase, they're saying, clearly I'm not being offensive because I'm a part of the group that you think are being offended, and that somehow exonerates them. I think that's is that premise true? That because I'm a part of, if I'm saying something offensive to black people, if I say that I'm some portion of black, that I should be, you should assume that I don't mean any harm by it.
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it pulls into the question of what does it mean to be something? You know what I mean? What does it mean to be a Native American? What does it mean to be black in such a way that you can own that connection? Part of me wants to say, like, if you wouldn't own that connection at the worst point in the culture's history, then I don't think you get to own it anytime. But it makes me think of if I was black at the worst time in history, I don't know if I'd want to own being black. You know what I'm saying? Can I be anything else to not have to deal with this? You know what I mean? But also that place of like you can't be denied from a visual standpoint. You can't be denied it. You know what I mean? Like if you and I are walking down the street in Alabama, we black. Like there's not a question of it. That are we something? You know what I mean? You may look at me and be like, "Are you Cuban? Are you black?" But it's not white. Like you're gonna have to deal with that. But if Pepper's walking down, right, she may be a quarter black, but if she looking like that, she don't get to claim black. She gets to pass, right? So I'm wondering about like, is there something in the actual passing and looking, and is there something about like the connection to and willingness to take on the hard histories of being connected to that group. That might be.
I think it's an interesting thing to say. You know, if you don't identify with the tough moments, right? If it right now it's like, there's a benefit to my blackness, so therefore, if for this scenario we're just gonna use black, but there's a benefit to my blackness, therefore I can say this thing. You're like, yeah, but what about when it's not beneficial? Do you still hold on to that?
Correct.
To hold on to that blackness, and I think it's interesting. I don't know. For me, I think you stay away from any of it, regardless, unless you're 88% black.
So now we have to find the percentage.
Right, unless you're like
that was my question. Is it a math issue? Like if I'm over 50%, like is it 52%?
If it's a surprise to the audience that you said that you probably need to go ahead.
That's probably the best way. Like if nobody else knows based on engaging with you.
If everyone's like, really? Then you probably should. You should probably wait.
Yeah. All right, hey, that's good. That's another little.
Okay, there it is.
We did what? That's right, and I love it. I'm hoping that's helpful for people too.
Yo, put in the comment section.
Yeah,
like other statements that you heard that you may want us to talk about. Get it in the comment section.
DM us. I mean, you can go to _threaded, our Instagram. I think we have a poll there, for places for people to kind of give us their own say what moments, and that's just an.
But also, just
put in the comments right here.
Just reply right here in the YouTube space, and talk to each other about it.
Ooh,
give us like I want to know some of people's answers too.
Me too.
Yeah, like what would they say? Like what do they wish? What do they wish we said?
Oh, well, yeah. Oh, that'd be fun to hear. Well, you got your assignment now, so this is good. I love it. That's part of engaging.
Yeah.
In the public square.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What is it they talk about with the
the internet comment section?
Yeah, it is. I mean,
the drudges of the public.
But it is, right? It's like the what are they? It's the social media spaces. This is the new public square. This is where people's ideas, their debates and things happen in this place. And look, as we know, any election season we see it, and so as we are in one right now, we're going to see more of that even kind of tick up, right? Where that's where they're going to get their ideas and their thoughts out there. So,
I mean, that's really are we transitioning? Because I think that's an interesting transition because when you start thinking about the role of social media on the public square, like you think about Christianity in the public square, the role of social media in politics, and therefore the role of social media and its impact on the general dynamic of the social square is a new thing, that is increasingly, like, I think Barack probably might have been President Obama.
Talking about I didn't know if you knew him like that. You could just call him.
We had catfish last night.
Barry,
so,
you call him Barry. You're hey Barry.
He just B to me.
Okay, all right.
But no, President Obama. He one of his campaign was the first ones to use it well, but President Trump is using it well as well. Like his whole thing is
he's using it usefully.
Well, like as far as like effectively, like his whole thing is more about the public opinion, the court of public opinion, if you will, than even some of the other things. And if he understands that he can win a lot of that space, that it's really beneficial to his campaign, and a lot of that is about the social media. And ironically, he's speaking to his base is a lot of evangelical Christians. Kind of comes back to the space of how we interface with social media, the social square, the public square, the political arena. It's one of those places where it's all mixed in.
Yeah, and I know we'll have an episode not specifically about the engagement of social media and how that works, although that would be a good episode. I need to figure out one. Yeah. But we will kind of talk about how to have that discourse effectively, which I think is be a great thing to see Christians, embrace, is to kind of go, how do we do this?
They embrace it.
What'd you say?
They embrace it.
Sorry. Embrace maybe a strategy that's a positive. Embrace a positive strategy.
I gotta say, man, that we are terrible at that.
Yeah, I agree,
and that is understating it tremendously.
I agree.
I'm very disappointed.
Okay,
in the Christian church's response to comment section.
I got you triggered. I didn't realize
you did,
I was going to trigger
because okay, that's not what we're doing today.
No, we're not doing it. But I appreciate it. Do we need a moment? I mean,
I'll say this, and then we
do need a moment. I guess
just 15 seconds. So I'll say this:
15 seconds.
One, she's counting right now.
She's not gonna
all right,
that.
one way we think about infecting the public square is through laws, legislation, politics. But one of the ways that Christians has affected negatively the public square is just in the comment section.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You imagine that. What if you didn't win the politics, but you won the comment section? I think that's an effective. I think it's one area where you say we could really change the way people be a better witness in how we deal with people just in that area. And so it just broadens the scope of what it means to be an effect to the public square, not just politics, not just some of the other methodologies, but how we respond and speak when we're in public.
Yeah.
And where the public is seeing it is huge.
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest negatives. And it's written. Anyone can go and continue to look at it over and over again.
Right. Which people forget.
Yeah. Internet's forever.
That's good.
Anyway.
Well, hey, let's...
I'm off of that soapbox now.
That wasn't 15 seconds.
That was way longer than 15 seconds. Yeah.
It was like 25 seconds.
No, man.
Oh, come on, bro.
It was like 20.
That's black pastor. That's black pastor.
Go back.
15 seconds.
I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna count, and it's gonna be like 45. I keep changing it. It's 45. I'm gonna go back. It was 3 minutes. Yeah.
That's all right. That's all right. You come from you grew up in a black church with a black pastor as a father.
I'm closing.
Yeah. You're 4 closings. Yeah. But today, those are good conversations. But today we're actually going to be talking about this idea of Christianity in public square. With maybe the term of like, how do you engage in things when you don't like them? Yeah, so we actually brought a guest in here.
Yeah,
that's going to come and kind of help us walk through this conversation. So I'm gonna introduce her.
Okay,
I'm gonna have to put on. You get to the age now.
I mean, if you got to make the announcement,
she's got a lot of stuff to kind of say.
Okay,
so I got to read it. Like I got to read it, and I can't read
Since it's a YouTube now, you got to tell us when you put the glasses on, because before it was
they didn't know. So I just
it didn't really matter. But
now they're just like, oh, that's how he was able to do the intro so well.
We now have Clark Kent.
That's all right. We'll be good.
Superman.
All right. So our guest is going to come in for this conversation. She is a friend of the show. She's been on the show before.
Yeah.
I've had her as a professor over at Fuller Theological Seminary, where she is the academic dean of Centro Latino and associate professor of mission and global transformation. Her core research interests, Pepper, I know you're going to be interested in this right here. Her core interests are the unique role and contribution of the church to movements in social transformation. Right?
Yeah.
So
this
is
perfect for what
I know it's perfect for what we got going on today.
Yeah.
Right. Now, she's also a writer, so she's written several books that are going to be, I think when you hear the titles, you're going to be like, oh, this is exactly why she's being brought in. First is Faith-Rooted Organizing, and so we've talked about that. We've had her on before, but...
Was that Faith-Rooted?
Faith-Rooted.
Yeah, organizing.
That's right. So it's very exciting. Another one called Buried Seeds, right? And this is learning from the vibrant resilience of marginalized Christian communities.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. That's that last one I think I've engaged. But she's got a new one out that I'm just finding out about that I'm going to be in on for sure. It's God's Resistance, Mobilizing Faith to Defend Immigrants.
Yeah.
I mean, this is super timely stuff that we're talking about here.
Yeah, highly relevant, very practical.
Yeah, so I'm excited to take off my glasses, finish the intro,
Superman
and welcome to the show, Dr. Alexia Salvatierra. How are you doing, Alexia? Good to see you.
I'm good. Good to see you guys too.
Good to have you in. So how you feeling? You're in California, right?
Yes, I am. I'm in Pasadena, California, part of Greater Los Angeles.
Yes, that's right. I don't know if all the Los Angeles like claim Pasadena all the time, but I like it. I think I think you should. When I lived there, Pasadena was a cool spot. Yeah, you had to go past like Burbank, and then it was like you're way out.
Embrace everybody.
That's right. There's some football stadiums out there, so we'd go out there just because.
Okay.
That's.
I have no idea. I've never been in any of that.
You haven't been out there? I went out.
You have a Pasadena too. You have a Pasadena outside Houston, I think.
We do, which is the Pasadena I knew about growing up. So when I was in LA, first of all, they would be talking about Pasadena. I was like, why are they talking about that armpit in Texas? Like it was so, like it is the hottest, steamiest place in Texas. So, but you are in a nice spot in California. where it's currently.
We're one of the oldest communities in the LA area, so
it's fantastic.
And we have, there's some real history around people of color here too. So
is there really? I did not know all of that.
there was a group of freed slaves who established a community in Altadena, which is, the northern part of the Pasadena area. Yeah. And it's still a primarily African-American community.
Oh my goodness.
And it's really nice. It's a beautiful community, old trees, people in their houses for multiple generations.
Wow. Well, I wish I would have known that when I was out there last year. I would have gone out there and checked it out.
Yeah, you definitely got to embrace it now.
Well, whenever I finally graduate from
go see my friend Pastor John Williams over at Monrovia Christian Fellowship. He's got the Center for Racial Reconciliation in North Pasadena area.
Right. Yeah.
He's the expert in all of that.
Okay, I'll have to talk to him. I did go to his church when I was out there last year. But I didn't get to meet him because Brian Loritz, I think, was preaching for him that week. So, it's the fun. Well, so here we are. You're talking about sort of this historical areas, freed slaves, right? These kinds of things. They didn't get freed on their own, right? So, right. I mean, we this summer we were able to kind of talk around Juneteenth. You know what I mean? And so that was obviously a big holiday that people engage. And in Texas, we take that really seriously, obviously, because it really marks where finally all the slaves were free. And so we understand that these things don't just happen, but there are ways in which people have to engage in the public sphere, in the public square, for things like that to change. So going back to where we started, Antwuan, like this idea of what happens when you're a Christian and you're existing in a space and the space is actually not, and I'll say it very generally, not what you like.
Okay, well, you said space, like
public sphere, public space,
because in this case, you might want to.
Okay, so the public space, it's not what you like. Yeah. So what do you do about that?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So
things aren't the way you think they ought to be from a Christian point of view.
Right.
What should you do about that?
Exactly. So I don't know, Alexia. Like you've got your history.
I was going to say, what is the question? Is part of that question? Should we Christianize the space?
Okay.
Like in other words, so the premise I'm thinking is, if you're a Christian and you're going to not be happy with an environment if it's not Christian, like
sure.
At some point,
should we do something to try to make it more Christian?
This is the presupposition that we want to discuss, right? Or at least part of it. I think we want to discuss, like, to what degree do you want to make a space Christian, or
exhibit,
what
you would imagine to be Christian values.
Yeah. So, like, what does it mean? Like, this is the question. Like, what do you do about the fact that things that are happening around you aren't just according to Christian ethics? Mm-hmm. Do you what's the thing? Do you try to make it more Christian, or do you exhibit Christian ethics? Like, what's the next
so
step?
You both are entering into the general arena of what's called public theology.
Yes.
And public theology is really all about stewardship. Mm-hmm. That stewardship of the gifts of democracy. And it's also about calling. So what is our prophetic calling if we think of Jesus as, priest, king, and prophet? Mm-hmm. So what is our prophetic calling? And what does it mean to be good stewards of the gifts of democracy? So let me unpack that stewardship one first.
Okay.
That we were talking last night, actually. I was with my friend, Dr. Sun Chanra, who lives across the street from me, who's also a professor. And he was having a little salon at his house, which he often does.
Yes, with his Korean barbecue.
Korean barbecue. And we were talking about my years in the Philippines as a missionary under the dictator, Ferdinand Marcos, that I was there from 1984 to 1987. So I was part of the People Power Revolution, when the people nonviolently ran over the tanks and deposed the dictator. And I was talking about what it was like to live under a dictatorship and how much I appreciated when I returned the gifts of democracy. That a democracy is a system in which everyone has a say in public decisions. Now, a private decision is a decision that I make that affects my family, maybe my small business, maybe my little church. A public decision is a decision that affects our whole community. And there are people who are public decision makers. And in a democracy, they represent the people.
Mm-hmm.
So, like when my daughter was little and she was in school and she acted out, who did they call? They called me.
The representative.
She represented our family, and I was responsible on some level for what she did. In the same way, in a representative democracy, you elect leaders and you hold them accountable to do what you have called them there to do. That benefits the whole community. And so if you have that power, then you have a responsibility. That's what stewardship means. That if you have a capacity, you have a responsibility to use it in obedience to the will of God and for his purposes, towards his glory, for the shalom of his people.
Right.
So there are a bunch of different ways to participate in a democracy. And we can talk about what those various ways are. But hiding your talents in the ground, burying them in the ground, is not a particularly good way to participate when you have talents, right? From the parable of the talents, that you have to use them in some form. Now, does that mean, and going back to your second question, does that mean that you try to take over? I think that we have a consistent theological theme in Scripture around humility.
Okay.
That David Bosch, the great missiologist, talks about bold humility. I'm a Lutheran pastor, and when Luther stood before the Pope and said, "Here I stand, God help me," right?
Yeah.
Not, I know everything.
Sure.
But here I stand. I'm trying to be faithful to what I know this far, trusting that if I'm wrong, that God will call me, teach me. But I think that we have to have this servant heart. We have to have this stance of humility. And that means we need to participate actively. It doesn't mean that we try to run things.
Right.
It means that we include our voice with passion and with humility, along with all the other voices that are speaking.
How do you make that? I mean, yeah, I think the question is in there is, it always looks like my act of stewardship based on what I think about God is the right act of stewardship based on what I think about God. How do we determine, what is, if I can put it in very general terms, how do we determine what the right version is?
What the communal good is.
Because I think there's people who have historically have participated, if you will, in a kind of public theology with a great sense of confidence in the way God wanted to Christianize a space and have done horrible things. Right? We just talked about slavery, right? That was justified.
Right.
And people would, when black people move into neighborhoods in the North, right, churches would take up collections, right, to try to buy them out of their house, or they'd go and tear their house down or tear their house up, and they did it out of a sense of, we should be segregated. God told us to be segregated. So how do we? Yeah. You've done. They
were Christianizing their neighborhood, or in their brains, or their country, even.
Yeah.
So I don't think we get out of the paradox of boldness and humility around human limitation and sin.
Okay.
I don't think we can know perfectly what God has said. I think we need to walk in fear and trembling, discern the best we can, and enter into the dialogue. Public theology is all about dialogue. And it's all about a dialogue that has the odor of Christ. So absolutely, I could be passionate and absolutely wrong about my biblical interpretation. Nobody is safe from that, because we're human beings, we're sinful human beings, but that doesn't free us from the responsibility of doing the best we can to obey God's will. I can be wrong about my own personal life. I can make really bad decisions, but I don't not move. I don't not make any decisions because I could make the wrong one.
Right.
No, I try to stay in dialogue with my brothers and sisters about my life. If you take it to an individual level, you understand it. I'm trying to be the best mom I can.
Sure.
I'm going to make some mistakes.
Right.
But
it doesn't mean you can't be a mom.
With the other brothers, but it doesn't mean that I don't be a mom.
Yeah.
I have to be a mom. That is the scandal of the cross. is that we are human. We're sinners. We're limited. But we need to act out of love, trusting that if we stay humble and we stay in conversation, that God will show us as we go how to get closer and closer to his will.
So there's a sense of
no, I'm not going to. One of the things that I hear, Markus, when you speak there's a subtext.
Yeah.
And it comes out of white evangelicalism. Maybe it comes out of dominant white culture. Mm-hmm. But it's this understanding that we can be absolutely right.
Yes.
And therefore we have to be before we move, before we do anything. We have to make sure we're right. That's not a particularly Latin American view of life. Mm. We don't believe we can be absolutely right. It doesn't free us. In fact, it sends us to our knees.
Yeah.
Over and over again. Because we know that God is absolute truth, but we aren't.
Right.
Who's kidding who? Right?
I think that's a really helpful articulation. And the place that I think we find is the barrier when it's time to move, right? In the work that we do, even it's like, hey, it's time to keep going, and everybody wants to get all the facts. And I'm not saying that you can't have all the facts. You know what I mean? That's not an important piece.
You do the best you can,
right,
to be good stewards of what has been given to you, which means you love as intelligently and as effectively as you can, because you don't just have a heart, you also have a mind, and you also have a public context. You know, in post-colonial research, that there's an awareness that you can't arrive at absolute objectivity. So what you have is the encounter of subjectivities, what the Jesuits in the 1500s called interculturalism, that they were missionaries to Japan, and they realized that they were bringing the wineskin of Spanish culture to Japan, and that they weren't going to get the pure wine of the gospel until they could pour it into Japanese culture. But then how do you make sure? But then what they found was that there was this wonderful gift to have the interaction of the pure wine of the gospel in Japanese culture and the pure wine of the gospel in Spanish culture. In the interaction, you get closer to the truth. It's the interaction of subjectivities that gets us to verifiability in research, not the assumption that everything is replicable or it isn't true.
Right.
And everything is measurable and everything is replicable. Not really, right? So some things are, but not many things. So you learn how to live on a moving planet. And because that's where we are.
Right.
Let's be real. Jesus meets us in the middle of where we are. Thanks be to God. And so as in our personal lives, in our common life, we just muddle along in dialogue with passion, talking to each other from our hearts, presenting all the truth we know as if it matters, because it does, living it the best we can, and knowing that we could be wrong, which is why the dialogue never stops.
Yeah, I like this connection of dialogue, right? Which is prophetic dialogue, because I think there is in this work that we're in the midst of racial justice, unity, organizing, whatever that is. I think that I smell in us, I'll say Christians, particularly those who want to move down some of these pathways that you have historically gone down, right? They're very much like, I'll use something that a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, and Jamar Tisby kind of made it popular recently, right? It's like justice takes sides, right? And so I think in the midst of that kind of atmosphere, there is this sense that they go, I want to be on the right side of history as I do things.
You take a side, because otherwise it's like saying, I'm not going to discipline my kids since I can't do it perfectly.
Right. That's what you're kind of like, hey,
take a side, you stand for it, and you keep listening and you keep talking.
Right. There's a continuation, because what happens is you say justice takes sides, you decide what the just side is, and then when you get there, you look at the other side and say, you're on the wrong side, you're the enemy, I'm not having a conversation with you, and it breaks down the opportunity.
Right. It breaks down the opportunity for ongoing conversion by everyone. When Jesus said, love your enemies, he wasn't kidding.
Yeah.
It wasn't minor.
Yeah.
And we don't love our enemies just to show how good we are.
Right.
We love our enemies because that's how we change our communities.
That's an interesting statement. So I want to come back to this stewardship because it's an interesting way to talk about the motivation for change. What's interesting to me, and I agree with it. What's interesting to me about it is when I think about people in our society and how they may view what it means to be a good steward of what they believe is right and just in the public square, and to what and how they assign their energy to that. Some people will take their idea of that and say, hey, to be a good steward is to get all the way to the point of the highest point of power and make the change in society. If I'm not doing that, then I'm not a good steward. Others might say, well, I see stewardship using, we're talking about politics, a certain degree of energy in the political space and another type of energy in another type of space in order to achieve a similar, the same outcome. And I think that's kind of where this conversation we're having is today. I think the challenge I think I'm hearing a lot in the Christian space is how much of my stewardship is assigned to the political energy, the energy I put into the political space versus the energy I would put in non-political spaces, but still public social things that have public social ramifications.
I think this, now I'm going to talk again about another sort of cultural assumption that we think is a theological assumption, which is that we're so dang individualistic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The scripture is not very individualistic.
Yeah.
We're the body of Christ. I'm a hand and you're a foot.
Mm-hmm.
And even that is sort of fluid, right?
Right.
But the hand and foot better be working together. Otherwise, the body doesn't work so well.
Right.
I've had times in my life where I was really focused on community development, which means you pull the resources of the community and you do what you can. I've had other times I was really involved in resisting systems that messed with the capacity of the community to meet our needs, right? So, there's been times, or when there was an opportunity to do something really powerful for the shalom of the community through impacting systems, through changing laws and structures.
Mm-hmm.
So, different people have different gifts and different passions, and we're all the body of Christ together.
But it took you getting
different seasons.
Yeah, it took you getting into that space to allow yourself to be moved, if you will, by the flow of what was needed, right? But there was something. You weren't just doing that out of a sense of, I want to be recognized as somebody who loves justice. But you were. But I understand from you, like you're looking at it from your book, right? Like a faith. There's a rootedness in faith that kind of draws us into this, right? So where do you see, just as we're thinking about those who are listening, like, okay, that all sounds good, but where do you get these impulses that maybe scripturally, thematically, missiologically, like where do you get these impulses to go into, to throw yourself, to take the step forward? As you're saying, it's just a matter of taking a step, and then you allow yourself to kind of be taken a hold by where the Spirit of God is moving. So what is the impulse that kind of even gets you into that move?
Well, I'm very Pentecostal, right? So I really think that if you're in conversation with God and listening to the Spirit and present in your community.
Okay.
Jesus was so present with the people in his community. The word compassion is Spanish word or an English word that consists of two Latin words, com and pasio. And pasio means feel and suffer, and com means with. So if you're with your people and you feel their suffering, that engenders in you compassion. And that compassion leads to action.
Do you think that's why people don't take the first step? Because they know that? You know what I mean? Like, right,
because they wall off their heart.
Yes.
Or they wall off their consciousness so that they don't have to see. We make ourselves, like Jesus said, where there's nobody as blind as the person who doesn't want to see and pretends they already see. We don't want to see the pain that's happening in our body. You know, even just talking about other believers, the pain that's happening in the lives of other believers.
Yeah.
If we took seriously that those are parts of our body, that the body isn't well if a part is in pain, and therefore we're not well if they're not well, and we just took that seriously, that truth seriously, and we allowed ourselves to feel the pain of the people in our body, that then motivates you automatically to act. And like the same way that if your hand is burned, you take it off the fire.
Yeah.
Right? That's how a body works. And our bodies, you know, sometimes, you probably heard me say this before, but this insight hit me a number of years ago, is, you know, Jesus's healings were always real and symbolic. So he opens the eyes of the blind to show that he's the light of the world. Why do you think he cured so many lepers? What is leprosy? Leprosy is the disease where you no longer feel the pain in your body.
Wow.
How are you going to be a responsible member of the body if you don't care about what's happening in the other parts of the body, if you don't feel with them?
Spiritual leprosy is communal leprosy.
I have a student who's studying the disciple-making movement all throughout Asia, and it's just this amazing movement of, just like the base Christian communion movement that I've written about and studied, where, you know, poor people in small group churches, mini churches, then, you know, send people to start new small group mini churches, and it's growing like wildfire. The disciple-making movement, the people who started it, did not have a theology of social transformation. But one of my students is studying the DMMs, that called the disciple-making movement, the DMMs on the ground, and danged if they don't actually get involved, not only in community development, but what we would call community organizing and advocacy, because they are full of the love of Christ, and they love the people in their community, and there are bad things happening. And so just the same way as if you saw someone attack a child, you would step in the same way they step in. It's very automatic. They don't have a theology of it. All they have, and you ask, you know, my student was saying, well, why are you doing this? Well, because I love Jesus and his love comes through me.
Yeah.
I love these people who are being hurt. You know, on some level, it's so very simple. And then when you go back to what I said earlier, which is you don't just love with your heart, you love with your mind. You love as intelligently and as effectively as you can in your context. And so that means if you have tools for actually creating a better school system, why would you just tutor people?
Yeah, you'd use that. I mean, it's so like, you know, in threaded, you know, Antwuan, in our strategy, thinking about reorient, identify, plan, and execute. So much of what we're always moving people towards, we keep talking about people like, where's the justice piece happen? And I was like, you know, it's going to be so much easier for people to move into justice when they've moved into community with people.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Like, you're there with the people.
Yeah.
There's no automatic line. It's not like this is direct service and this is community development and this is community organization. You just do what's needed.
Right. To your brother or sister that you've gotten connected with, that you've identified with, that you've built what we call refrigerator rights relationship with. Like, you know, Antwuan and I've been friends for 15 years. If there's something that happens to Antwuan, it's not even going to be a thought. Like, I'm going to engage that because of the relationship. And the more we get into the community, we start putting faces to the quote unquote problems, and then, you know, the stuff you teach us as well, and recognizing the actual assets that these people have as well that maybe aren't being utilized or supported. And then all of a sudden you start to make different decisions. But so it sounds like there's this impulse of like, you have to recognize that humanity is valuable, period, and that we should not close ourselves off from other people. So this goes to that individualism that you were talking about. We're a very individualistic society, and so this collective thought process is just not in our brains. So we have to have a collective mentality of thinking the people around me are folks I need to see, right? It's who is it? Peter and John who walk into the temple and they see the beggar there, and the Bible says he turned and looked at him, right? And so the looking sees the thing and says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And so it's this seeing first, and then in the presence. I like that, being in present with the folks in their lives, and immediately you're going to find yourself working and putting yourself into very fluid movements that deal with whatever is there, utilizing your assets, but then also inviting them to be a part of the process as well, right? So
because you see them, if you really see them, you see them as part of your body.
Yeah.
You don't see them as only need.
Yeah, exactly.
You see them as part of your body. And then if we're going beyond the church, we're talking about family. We have one Heavenly Father.
Yep.
That means we're brothers and sisters. That's very heavy in my cultural community. You know, I have a sister, we don't get along. But if she's ever in need, I'm there.
Right.
Right. But not because I think that I'm the big savior and she's the poor sister. We're family.
Yeah.
If I'm in need, I expect her to be there.
Right.
So we're body of Christ with some people, but we're family with everyone. And, you know, we can be a dysfunctional family where one family member has 3 Mercedes-Benz and another is starving, or we can be a functional family where we take care of each other.
This is that beloved community, global world house. You know, Dr. King talks about we all live in the same house, and you can be mad that you're in your room over here, but if the foundation's cracked in the house, it's going to take everybody's room out, right?
So we take everybody.
You know what I mean? So we all need to recognize that we're trying to build the same thing here. Now
I call it Familia Justice. Familia Justice.
Okay.
And if you just really see everyone in your community as your family, and if you see everyone in the Christian community as your body, everything flows from that.
Yeah. Now I want to take a turn here because we've got you here. And, you know, you're one of, I don't know if you're the only anymore, but I think when I met you a few years ago, you were the only Christian, I think, community organizer that was at the seminary level kind of teaching and thinking about this. I don't know if that's still the case or not, but there's also history. I mean, if you read your books and sit down with you and hear the stories, like there's all these things that you just throw out, like you did it, like I was in the Philippines during this movement, or I was standing and these guys were pointing guns at us and they were going to shoot us and we just prayed for them and then walked away. And I'm like, wait, hold up, Alexia, like what? You can't just like walk through that, right? Like you got to tell the story.
Drive by.
Yeah, she's just throwing stuff out like, oh, when we were working on it. So the life that you've had in some ways, right? And we talked about impulse, we talked about the fluidity and the ways that you've done it. You have found yourself, and I'll use this terminology, you can do with it what you want. You have found yourself moving into a kind of protest mode, right? About what is going on. And you said it kind of in terms of systemically, right? What brought you, like, and you got stories that you can tell for days, but is there a particular story that shows like, hey, there's this thing that I went into the protest mode on because of the impulse, right? My sort of Christian faith impulse. And here's some of the tenets of what that looks like so that those who maybe they see protests, and I'll say protests where people kind of demonstrate, they think they want to get in, but they don't know if that's a Christian thing to do or how to do it. Like there's just questions around it. So I don't know, take that and stir it up for me for a second.
Yes, I have a couple of different kind of things that come up when you say that. What really shifted me from community development as a sort of basic orientation, which is I think most Christians, when you start, the love of Christ starts coming through you, the natural impulse is direct service, right? Like somebody's in need and you give them what you've got or you share. Right. But that's obviously, give someone a fish, teach someone to fish. It's more intelligent to work with people than it is to work for them. It doubles the amount of energy and resources, right? And so you move with a little bit of education and thought very easily from direct service to community development. But then to move to the next level where protest is one of your tools. And I want to talk a little bit about the role of that tool in a minute.
All right.
But I remember being in college in the early 70s. That's how old I am. And working as I was in a social work class. And I was working we called it tenements in a barrio. They were public housing. And there was an 11-year-old girl who was in the little tutoring program. And she told me that she'd been raped by her uncle. Now, at that time in history, we didn't have any of domestic violence shelters. The first one existed in 1971. We had no special legislation around domestic violence or sexual abuse. It was under sort of general violence. and it was very hard to prove. And they would put a child on a witness stand, and that child would fall apart, and the whole family might be destroyed. And so, I thought my social work training is to help her adjust to this situation. No. We're not helping her adjust to this situation.
Like, you want the situation to be gone, right? Like,
we're going to change the situation, and not just for her.
Right.
The justice is not just us, like not just for her, but how are we going to make it so that there's options for an 11-year-old who's raped that make sense, that work. And so that's when I think for me, the first time that I started looking at systems, saying, is there a way to make a better system for 11-year-olds who are raped, right? Is there a way to make a better system for mothers who are experiencing steady domestic violence in their home? Are there systems we can create that are better? So I would say that was a shift. I think in terms of protest, I talked about democracy earlier, but even in countries where there is not a democracy, Gandhi said the governors can't govern without the consent of the governed.
Sure, yeah.
It's not possible. Yeah. And so even in countries that are dictatorships, there's still this role around the consent of the governed, around the voice of the people, that there's still a role of stewardship in terms of the participation in the voice of the people. But how will the people's voice be heard? And we have a lobbying industry in this country. In the early 1960s, there were like 60 lobbyists. And now there are, who knows, hundreds, thousands, right? Mm-hmm. There's so much organized money going into the democracy process that sometimes just calling your congressperson or just sending a letter, or you and all your friends sending letters, it's not a loud enough voice to be heard. And for them to actually see the breadth and the depth of the passion around the issue. And so that's why you do a public action. But I think the first time that I saw really effective public action was in the Philippines, when there was no access to democracy, and public action was the only way that the people could communicate their response to what was happening.
The voice of the unheard.
But even in this country, because of what I said about the lobbying industry, that a public protest is just an amplification of civic participation. It's an amplification of the voice of the people.
And the assumption of that is that the voice, that you're amplifying something you have been doing before, right? It's not that this is the first time, in many cases, it's not the first time that somebody has said this is a problem. And
no, that's right. And in fact, I really believe, most organizers really believe in what we call escalation.
Yes.
Like, when the widow goes to the unjust judge, she doesn't go to him once, right? She goes to him over and over and over again. Well, if she was doing escalation, she would have brought more widows the second time. She would have, come up with different ways. You just you keep escalating a critical mass of pressure until the person, it's less painful to do what's right than to not do it.
Right.
And that's intensifying your voice. People do it in families, right?
Yeah.
All the time. You say to your kid nicely, pick up your clothes. Yes. And by the fourth time they don't, you say, pick up your clothes. You escalate. Because that's how human interaction works on an animal level.
Yeah, I think the rub, I'm just thinking through a lot of what we're doing and what we're talking about. And we're trying, what I keep coming back to is, but what if that doesn't work? Like everything we're saying, we keep doing all these things and we keep waking up and we're still dissatisfied with society. Like what? And the temptation, I think, is to try to achieve a community of love through power. When in reality, I think what we're trying to do is show the power of love in society, through love. And I think it seems like what happens in the Christian community is one voice is saying, hey, if you want to change society to be more like, to reflect the kingdom of God better, we've got to love better. And the power-minded people are like, yeah, that's not good enough. Like, we've got to like seize the highest. We've got to take control. We've got to take control. That's going to be the shortest path to making a community of love. If we were in charge, we would dictate and legislate and craft our own culture of love. And I'm wondering when the stress arrives and we're like, man, we've been going at this thing for a long time. We keep trying to make things different and it just isn't. What am I going to do next? Are we going to fall into what I believe is the temptation of over pursuit of power in order to achieve love, as opposed to figuring out how to love?
I honestly don't think. I mean, Antwuan, I think those are really good questions. First of all, I think some people are called into public service in public leadership.
Yeah,
I think they are, and I think that's a really hard place to be.
I don't disagree with that.
That's the first one. The second one is that I think that the question of means and ends is, you notice when the means are so off God's path that you can't get to the ends from there. That's the question you have to keep asking yourself. What is the means that I'm trying to use so far off the path that there's no way to get there? That's what Gandhi said about violence. He said it was that you couldn't get to the ends we were trying to get to with violence as a means. Jim Lawson, who was Dr. King's theologian of nonviolence, who was one of my mentors, just passed away last week, 2 weeks ago. He used to say, violence is a shortcut with unacceptable consequences. So I wouldn't even go that far. I would say there are a few times in our lives and in our history where violence is worth the consequences. The consequences are always terrible, but there are times when it's worth it. I would never rule out just war completely, but I would say it's the absolute last alternative. And if we allow it to be an alternative, well, this is what Jim would say. If you allow it to be an alternative, it won't be the last one. Because it's so compelling and seductive to the carnal self.
That's the point, is that it is seductive, and it's because our natural instinct, it seems to me, even in our modern day, for what looks like a lot of the evangelical,
this hunger for
power, right? And it is, right, and some of it is violence.
We're going to have safety.
Yes, if we can just have authority,
corporal power, and I feel like there's a false dichotomy there.
Right.
Let me just say this. Let me just push back on you.
Okay.
There's a false dichotomy because mostly we're not ever going to be able to reach that much power. To try to get a little more power in the conversation to even the scales is not a bad thing. But to get a little louder voice, to get a little more resources in the dance of the public square, it's not a bad thing to try to get a little more power. The truth is, we're not, most of us, going to have the option of a level of power that would be in core violation of our servant posture.
Yeah, I think the two work together.
We're a long ways from that.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, that power is off the table, or authority, or even force. That's not what I mean to intimate. What I'm getting at is, what is the cart and what is the horse? And is the horse power that's trying to bring love into society, or is the horse love, right, that's trying to bring change into society? And I think what the seductive instinct, the naturalistic jungle-like instinct of us, when we're and this is weird to say, because when we're talking about Christians, we're supposed to be spiritually minded more than we are carnally minded, and yet it's this carnally minded concept that says that to bring change, I need power first to do it, and Jesus is constantly saying, no, love is the power. But
right, Scripture is full of that message that you're giving.
That's
just
right.
Full of it. Don't trust in the horses and chariots. Trust in the Spirit. Right, over and over and over again. Right.
Yeah.
But love is the compelling center. Love is the great commandment, not power, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm wanting to just articulate, like, that's the part I'm thinking through is, as I'm sitting here thinking through, man, we don't have civil rights without action, without movement, without force in some ways, right? We don't have hardly anything that has led to any real positive change in American history without fight, without some sort of force. But for the Christian, it's got to be love that is the primary driver, and not our faith is in love, not in authority and power and force.
We forget that
sometimes
love is
that's not the way we are actually living out. We're assuming that we can shelve love for a moment, take power, seize authority, and then try to go get love again and set things up. And I think that has hurt us, and that's caused people to question whether Christians should be in the public square or not. And it's what's created.
Let me give you an entirely different framework. You're saying power versus love. I would like to say that there are different kinds of power. There's power over and there's power with.
Okay.
There's also power within. Mm-hmm. But I just want to talk right now about power over and power with. Mm-hmm. The power of love is relational power.
Yeah.
It's power with.
Yeah.
So that's not love versus power. It's power over versus power with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I can work with that.
Yeah.
And I would prefer that. Like, I think that's a more inspiring message. And it is the message that could still lead to a Dr. King nonviolent, massive change over this humongous problem, to say it lightly, that American had with civil rights and slavery. And then, of course, we still have more work to do. But it was the power of love and not the love of power. Right, that does that, and I think there's a difference between the two. We forget that love has
real power. Yeah, love has real world power.
If it's the core engine, like it's got to be the real reason we're moving forward, and sometimes it isn't. But go ahead.
So, yeah. but I do want to. I bristle when a white man who has a lot of power talks about how the Christian way is to avoid power. Like he needs to avoid power. Oh. He needs to bahar. He needs to go down. But that doesn't mean I need to go down. If we're supposed to be the all flesh together, we'll see the glory of God. The mountains are lowered and the valleys are raised, and all flesh together sees the power of God. That's power with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that means people who have power over need to come down, while people who are powerless need to come up to have power with.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the first to be last, I think
it's a more useful framework to me.
Okay.
But I think that what you're speaking to and what I would want to name as the danger is to live from a place of fear that doesn't trust the power of God.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the Desmond.
It feels like love sometimes for people is not effective enough. And so they resort to these fear-based tools, which are power. And
it's really not putting power over love. It's putting fear over love.
Yeah. That's probably better said.
And that's
and you would say Desmond Tutu. Yeah. That great story. And I got to meet him once. That was my rock star moment when I had a personal conversation with him, but in a small group. But there's a great story about him before he won the Nobel Peace Prize, in the middle of the whole apartheid struggle. And it's Sunday morning. I've heard 4 versions of the story from different people who were there, but it's all basically the same story.
It's like the Gospels.
So
you're just going to get different angles on the story.
That's right. That's right. And it's the same story when you have these different angles, but you can see the story, you can feel it. So he was, it was a Easter morning, and the regime sent soldiers into the cathedral with rifles, and they ringed the inside of the cathedral. And the people were terrified. They were terrified that he was going to speak against apartheid, which he often did, and that they would shoot. I mean, they had shot Archbishop Romero in front of the altar, right? It wasn't impossible. They would shoot him and they would shoot other people. But they were also terrified that he wouldn't speak, because if he was successfully intimidated, the regime had won. So what he did is he starts bouncing up and down on his heels a little bit. He's a short man. You have to remember that, just so you have the image. And he starts laughing, he starts just laughing uproariously, like laughing like a child. And when you do that, what happens, right? Everybody starts laughing. And then in the midst of all the laughter, he calls out to the soldiers. And he says, little brothers, you know our God is a God of justice, the God of the Exodus. You know we're going to win. He said, but we don't want a single one of you to miss a moment of the celebration because the party wouldn't be complete without you. So join us now. Mm. He goes on to preach fiercely against apartheid, and nobody shoots. So what stopped them? Well, he loved them. He looked past the rifles at the boys, and he loved them. And he also, his faith and his hope were so tangible that they had to wonder whether he was right. That's the real world power of love.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't really get
the Holy Spirit is a spirit of power. Yeah. Let's not pretend otherwise. But it's a different kind of power.
Yeah,
not power over.
And I think that's
authority.
And I think that's such a big piece that you're articulating, at least in the context, and it speaks to the fact that you, as you mentioned earlier, you're like, look, I come from a Pentecostal background. This idea of the Spirit is not a thing I have to make up on a Sunday morning. Like it's what we talk about all the time. So the belief that following after the Spirit of God into the things that God wants to do in humanity, which is to redeem all humans back to him, all of the family back to him, because they are image makers, or they are people who are made in his image. The fact that knowing that there's a God who is trying to do that and you just jumping in with him, you can believe that God is going to lead you in the direction that's going to be right as far as when things are happening. And if you follow him, you will flow into different ways in which you may have to do it. Sometimes you may have to you may have to write a letter and it gets done. Sometimes you just have to show up at a city council and bring a couple people and it gets done. Sometimes you're going to have to get some signs and stand outside and yell with a megaphone and get it done. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the game, what we see is sometimes you're going to have to push even more to protect those who are being treated as less than human, to ensure that they get to experience the flourishing that all humans and all image bearers should have. But it's guided by the Spirit.
Somebody,
yeah.
If you walked by a big person beating up a small person, what would you do?
Yeah. I think we all know that. I mean, that's the general thing. We all know that sort of in our own spirit. And if you put that in front of people, most people are going to say, yes, I'm going to do something about that. But something happens when you start talking about it in the terms of the systemic area, that there's some kind of block to that. But I'm really still I'm still really thinking it's an important piece as we talk about public theology. This public theology has to come out of a connection to and an understanding of the power and the work that God is doing through the Spirit in the world.
Yeah, the mission of God.
The mission of God, which we come back to all the time. We always talk about in our space being mission-minded. It's one of our capabilities, right? We want people to see, like, what is God trying to accomplish and what is getting in the way, if you will, of God being able to move in these spaces. Now, God can't be stopped by anything, right? But he allows us to participate in the work that he's doing, and he uses us to do it as a gift to us. Not because he needs us, but it's a gift that we get to participate in the work of the Spirit and do it. But we can't participate if we don't step forward, right? Mm-hmm. It's like you're sitting it's like the river is just moving and it's God's mission and everything's moving in there, and you're looking at, and you're sitting on the shore and you're going, what a beautiful river that is. As opposed to getting in the river. You're like, oh, it looks really scary. It may carry me away. Just get in it. Like, you don't have to dive right in the middle. Just start walking in the river of the mission of God and see what happens and see where it takes you. And that's what we're missing out as people who are going, they're so scared that the river, and they don't think it's the mission of God. They think it's something else. That the river is going to take them so far and so wild and they're going to be out of control that they don't even take the step. But if we can just take that first step to know that we should be engaged in a public theology, and then trust that God, and trust in every step that you check in, if you will, and follow God, but check in to see where God is doing, see what God is having you do, then you end up, at least in some cases, in moving, at least in some cases, towards what you believe to be right, as opposed to just sitting in the chair talking about it on some microphones. Mm-hmm. Man, what a good combo!
Yeah, this
is good. Thank you so much, Alexia. This is always, I always love sitting down, hanging out.
Yeah.
We hadn't done it in a while. But if I get out to Cali, you know what I mean? I'm gonna holler at you, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm out in Dallas,
I know. I'm gonna take you to. I took you to that great.
You got to invite me, because I've yet to.
You did.
I got her some. So I got her some Dallas food, and she's tiny. So I was like, you can't be walking around Dallas that tiny, and walking around with me. I got to take you someplace where they go feed you a bunch of food, because people look at me like, why is this girl so tiny? You got to get this girl some food, man. Get her some food, dude. Yeah. So I try to take care of her. Take care of her.
Okay.
Hey, this has been great. Thank you so much, Alexia. Antwuan, as always, a good thing. And obviously, thank you for the listener and the viewer who's coming in and trying to figure out what does it look like for Christians to be active or to be in the public square. We've engaged the idea of should we. In our previous episode, we've looked at different ways in which race has played out and how the Christian kind of maneuvers around this scale and this paradigm. And here we are talking about what does it look like when we don't get our way, and how do we engage that? And I keep thinking about the terms that you talked about, Alexia. I think about the following of the Spirit of God, this trusting that the Spirit of God is at work in it and following Him into the space. But then also when you're in there, as you're dealing with who you're dealing with, that you work in dialogue. Right? Instead of this constant coming into battle, there's a dialogue that happens. And I'm always amazed when I do this in places, when we do this in our racial conversations, when I do this interfaith, when you just start to have dialogue about the things that you can connect with, you'd be surprised how connected you can be as far as these policies concerned. So
I think I have one more thing I want to say.
Oh, we're gonna get a final word. I like it. This is a black church. There's one more close.
Yeah,
I know you closed 3 times.
If we follow Jesus, we have to ask, where is he going?
Yeah.
And where he was always going was in the streets. And where he was always going was to the places that nobody else went. Mm-hmm. When everybody else was running away, Jesus was running towards. Always.
I love it. That's exactly right. I remember you saying that before. That's a perfect way to end this thing. Follow Jesus into it. Where is he going? Is he going into the public square? If so, let's follow him in there. Hey, we love it. This is Color Commentary. Colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. I've been Markus Lloyd. This is Antwuan Malone.
Hit the subscribe button.
Hit the subscribe button. Give a shout out to our amazing guest, Alexia Salvatierra.
Yes, tell her what you thought.
That's right.
Share your thoughts in the comment section. I think it'll be really fun.
That's fun.
I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys are reading, I guess.
That's right. You got to be reading her next,
what you guys are thinking.
They're thinking, but also get in on her books and check it out. Alexia, what's the new book you just tried? I don't have it in front of me.
Well, it's written with a team. I was writing with a team. It's called God's Resistance, Mobilizing Faith to Defend Immigrants.
That's fantastic. So check out everything that she's got. It's going to be fantastic. So, this is Color Commentary. And so this idea of being colored is about really putting on the different lenses of our ethnic brothers and sisters and looking through those lenses to try to see the world in 4D. As opposed to 2D. And so this is why when we have this conversation, we always at the end encourage you to stay colored.